All right, we'll just quick fire. And the first question, so in NAMWOLF's 2014 article, Uninvited, Preferred Counsel Lists and How They Limit Minority and Women-Owned Law Firms' Access to Legal Work, it is stated that use of preferred counsel lists has had the unfortunate consequence of perpetuating historic inequality, since those lists are predominantly comprised of large majority-owned firms. Its selection criteria often includes a history of representation, among other reasons. So a three-part question for you. How should corporations rethink their panels and preferred counsel list strategy? What are some other common reasons that women and minority-owned firms are rationally, and I say that in inverted commas, barred from preferred panels? And how do they best position themselves?
Let's start with the first question. We'll take them one by one. First of all, let me be very clear. I 100% support the notion of consolidating your list of law firms across the globe to take advantage of economies of scale, easier to develop deeper, richer relationships, and all the other benefits associated with using less firms. However, if you're not cognizant of this next point, you're basically going to be recirculating the white male majority-owned law firms that you have historically used, when at the same time you're desirous of using more minority and women-owned law firms. And the reason for that is simple, is because when you send out those RFPs to those large firms, you're going to be sending them out to the same firms that you've been using historically, that you play golf and tennis with at the club. And you're going to be ignoring the firms that you're trying to give the ability to come into your corporate world. So that's the concern. So the first thing you need to do is understand there's a risk of adversely impacting a goal that many of your legal groups have, which is to increase the utilization of minority and women-owned law firms. Once you have that realization, there are things you can do to minimize the impact. There's three that I'm aware of. One, when I was at Accenture, I had the goal of significantly consolidating the list of law firms we were using globally from 450 to under 200. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, because we deemed diversity and inclusion important and the utilization of minority and women-owned law firms important, we created a separate list of minority and women-owned law firms that were on a separate panel list. And we grew that from 0 to more than 10. That is one approach. Yep. Another approach is to basically say that if I have a panel list of 100 firms, at all times, a minimum percentage of that list will be minority and women-owned law firms. So for example, 20 to 25%. And I've seen that work in the corporate world. And then the third approach is what I call the bypass approach. That if you have your list of panel firms, and the majority of them are majority-owned law firms, that at any time the hiring in-house counsel wants to utilize a minority and women-owned law firm, they can bypass that rigid panel process and get approval to bring those firms in. So the key to this is to understand that the issue of consolidation and the issue of utilization of more minority and women-owned law firms is not binary. They're complementary, but you have to have a focused effort to make sure that you can reconcile both interests.
Yeah, absolutely.
Second question.
Absolutely. And also just to sort of add on to that, just in terms of how these minority and women-owned firms can best position themselves, because we hear that from some of the clients as well. And again, which is what's leading to the session we're going to do with your member firms, that we're going to include Exelon as well, because we've had some of that feedback from them, and they're going to sort of help with some top tips as to how they can sort of best compete in that RFP process and put the best foot forward. What do you think on that front?
So this is an easy question. Let's use NAMWOLF as an example. We are a nonprofit trade association made up of 195 certified minority and women and LGBTQ-owned law firms.
Yeah.
But we're not first and foremost selling diversity.
Right.
What we're selling, and what all of our law firms need to be selling, is the amazing quality and value that they provide that's equal to, if not better than, what you are used to getting. With diversity and inclusion being the cherry on top of the ice cream. So what our firms need to continue to do, and they do a pretty good job of it, is sell the quality and value that they bring to the table.
Yep.
They may get in the door because they're minority and women owned, but they're only going to get the business if they rank equally, if not better, than the firms they're competing with.
Totally. Yep. Actually, it was so interesting to hear on your GC panel at the recent conference that almost exclusively everyone on the panel was saying that, you know, the quality from the NAMWOLF firms is as good as any of the majority firms have used. And actually, the standout was you get a more personalized service. So not only are you getting the quality, you're getting a more personalized service. And that was said across the board from, you know, really every single one of the GCs on that panel, which I thought was super interesting.
As a buyer of legal services for most of my career, I am not going to tell you that every single lawyer I used that was with a minority women-owned law firm met or exceeded my expectations. But I will tell you that the percentage of hitting it out of the park with minority and women-owned law firms compared to the majority-owned law firm was unequivocally better. And I've heard that from lots of corporations. And the reason for that is obvious but patently unfair, is that unlike majority-owned law firms that get 3 strikes, if you use the baseball metaphor,
right,
our law firms not only get 1 strike, but they also know if they don't do well, it not only tarnishes their image, but the image of all of our firms in our stable. And that's
a lot of pressure.
High burden, right? That's pretty tough.
Yeah, that is. That's a big burden to carry. But it's unfortunately probably a reality.
It is. They're held to a higher standard than majority-owned law firms.
Well, that was another interesting point that came off your GC panel, and that is several of GCs said they shouldn't be held to that higher standard. I mean, they actually pointed that out specifically and said we should not be holding them to a higher standard.
Our law firms should be held to the same standard.
Correct.
They should not be held to a higher, but they are. I'll give you an example. I always ask the question, you know, somebody will say to me, hey, Joel, I used a Hispanic-owned law firm in Los Angeles to do some work, and they didn't do a great job. I go, okay. Have you ever used a white male, large majority-owned law firm? All the time. Have they always exceeded your expectations? No, several times they don't. What do? Well, we give them another chance. We write it off. We ask for another lawyer. I go, that's interesting. I go, did you ever say, because I had a bad experience, I'm not going to use another white male-owned law firm across the United States? No, Joel, that's ridiculous. I go, well, let's think about what you're telling me. You had one bad experience with the law firm. Who knows where the fault lies? And you're suggesting that because of that, you're not going to give minority and women law firms across the states the opportunity to compete for and win the business? You're holding our firms to a higher standard. That is unfair. And then the lights, you know, go off. They never, ever thought of it. And whether it's conscious or unconscious bias, it's part of what we do for a living. We make it very clear. Bring them on board because they can do your work and do it well, and hold them to the same standards, not to a higher standard. And if you have a bad experience, you have a bad experience. Treat that experience like you would with big law.
As an isolated, exactly right. Exactly right. It's such an important point, actually. Excellent. So moving on to the next question. Can you comment for us on the rationale for supply diversity being both a business imperative as well as a moral imperative, i.e. just being the right thing to do?
No, it's another great question. So let's look at statistics. Statistics will tell you in the United States, and I can't speak to statistics outside the States, that women and minorities at big law are leaving big law at 10x the white male. So the unmanaged attrition rate for women and minorities is much greater than it is for the white male. Mm-hmm. And they're leaving big law for a myriad of reasons. One of them clearly is they're not being treated equally. We know that. So where are they going? Well, they're either leaving the practice of law altogether, they're going in-house, which is absolutely incredible, mm-hmm. or they're showing the entrepreneurial courage and spirit to start their own law firm.
Right.
So when they leave big law and start their own law firms, shouldn't we as corporations give them that opportunity to compete for and win the business? Doesn't it help us, one, with diversity and inclusion in our legal profession, but also help get big law to understand they need to do more with respect to the minorities and women that they have in order to keep the business? The other thing that's really telling is most corporations have these highly touted supplier diversity initiatives. And they're at the corporate level, they're on the website, they speak about it all the time, and they're premised on the notion that minorities and women in business have been economically, historically disadvantaged. So when they leave their service or product providers and they start their own businesses, we as a corporation know it's incumbent upon us to give these folks the opportunity to compete for and win the business. The legal profession is dead last with respect to the hiring and retaining of minorities and women. When they go off and start their own law firms and become a certified minority or women-owned law firm, legal is not exempt from the corporation supplier diversity initiatives, but many of them don't understand that they're part of it. Yep. And by providing a forum for these minority women-owned law firms to get into corporations, we're both serving the moral and the business reasons. And by the way, on the business rationale, we know analytic after analytic has shown that corporations that have more diversity in what they're doing with respect to both big law and minority women-owned law firms are showing better metric, higher cash flow, more revenue, more profit, better decisions, more innovative decisions, and finally, my favorite is higher engagement. Corporations that are more diverse in taking advantage of the diverse talent, either from big law or from minority women-owned law firms, have a higher engagement, which means they're more productive and they're doing bigger and better and greater things.
Yep. Actually, going back to the GC panel again, I took serious notes at your GC panel. It was so good. There were so many great nuggets in there, but I think it was the GC from Walgreens that actually put up a slide and it had all the, you know, the business case, the percentages. I mean, literally she laid it all out.
I'm laughing at you because that's my slide. She asked for it. That's the data. No, and I'm laughing because first of all, she's fantastic. Walgreens, off the record, never heard of us 2 years ago. And I met with her. Okay. And they invited me in. I did my CLE. They put our firms on their panel. They are sponsoring. They're active. They joined our programs. Amazing. But that slide, so here's my view. It is good enough for me to be bought on the need to do more with respect to D&I in our profession because we have a professional and a moral obligation to be focused on it. But unfortunately, not everybody thinks like I do. Yep. Some people need to be sold purely on the dollars. Yep. And we can sell them on that. That slide is a perfect example.
Yeah, it is. It is.
And I don't like having to sell people on that because to me, the professional and the moral reasons are much greater.
It should be enough.
We know that diversity inclusion is both a moral imperative and a business imperative. And you're seeing that, by the way, with what's happened in late June of this year, you're seeing more and more CEOs and board of directors demanding that they make the changes that companies and legal groups have never made before. So I hope that leads to some good results.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, which shouldn't matter what the reasons are why, but I mean, look, it's unfortunate that it has to be sold in that way, as you say, and it'll probably, nothing will ever be just on the moral basis. I mean, think about the same argument when you think around like, you know, social entrepreneurship and the nonprofit model versus the social business where you can do good and have a mission and make money, and that's okay. You know, but you're still having that fundamental, you know, impact. And so this is a sort of similar thing. But yeah, it's just, whatever encourages anyone to get involved, I think is great, because ultimately they'll figure it out. Like it may be that they're sort of, you know, like, you know, you start on the basis that it's the business imperative, but you ultimately, once you're drawn in and you start, you know, you're seeing the data and you figure it out, you twig to it ultimately, that it's both.
And by the way, you know, looking at corporations and law firms and legal departments that have been the most successful, the reason they're most successful is because they don't see it as binary. They do it because of both the business and the moral reasons. Yeah. They fight for them together and they argue for them together and they get the results they want.
Yeah. Well, if you don't have that moral compass, you're never going to fight for it in the way that you need to ultimately, right? So that has to be the driving force. And then you can sell it however you need to sell it, but you ultimately have to feel that it's the right thing to do. Absolutely. So look, probably you've kind of addressed some of the points, but I'll just ask it very directly anyway. But given that currently the greater proportion of work does go to the majority firms, why shouldn't we just focus on big law firm diversity and solving for staffing mix and retention of minority and women lawyers in these firms?
So again, like I alluded to earlier, the big firm diversity and supplier diversity are not binary, they're complementary.
Yeah.
And by the way, if you as a corporation are doing everything I want you to do with respect to supplier diversity, approximately 80 to 95% of your outside counsel spend is going to be with big law. So first and foremost, continue demanding that big law not only give you the efforts, but the results with respect to what you're asking for. And there's a whole set of things you should be demanding from your law firms, whether it's relationship partners that are more diverse, the work's being done at all levels by more diverse attorneys, having them expand their pipeline and looking for talent in places they haven't looked at, challenging the origination credit, demanding that they partner with other minority women law firms. So there's a whole set of things that in-house needs to continue or increase doing with big law. On the other hand, until big law is providing us equality in the law, we have got to give the minorities and women that are leaving big law that opportunity to compete for the business. Because if we don't, we're going to decrease the amount of diversity in the legal profession, which is rather, it's not good to begin with.
Yeah, right.
So again, what I ask corporate legal departments to do is have a pillar focused on what we can do to get more diversity with big law, but at the same time, either create or enhance their focus on increased utilization of minority and women-owned law firms. They need to do both or their program will not be successful.
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. Excellent. All right, so what is the single most impactful thing that corporations are doing right now to move the needle with diversity and inclusion in legal? And do you think this has been heightened by the recent resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement?
You're great at asking compound questions. Let me answer.
Sorry. Break it up.
No, I'm teasing you. You're forcing me to think. So I'm going to answer the first part from two perspectives. One, the macro D&I perspective, and number two, the NAMWOLF perspective. At a macro level, the single most important thing that corporate legal departments need to do is create a program that allows for institutional and systemic changes and as strategic as any other strategic imperative they have. It is only when they treat diversity and inclusion as important as any other critical issue they are facing that the program will work and they'll get the change they want. That means they need top down and bottoms up and middle support. They need to have a mission and vision well articulated and distributed and shared both internally and externally. They need to have accountability defined. They need to have goals that are concrete and measurable created. They need to use both a carrots and sticks approach, because I'm very Pavlovian. You got to reward the behavior you want and punish the behavior you don't want. And by the way, that's not only senior leadership, but that's from the general counsel, the first year paralegal. They need to lead and not follow. And they need to go after the awards and have some failures. And the reason I say that is because if you have no failures, it means you're not being innovative enough. But the reason I say go for the awards, I say it for two reasons. Number one, there's clearly an ego fulfillment perspective to getting awards. But much more importantly, when you go for awards and you win them, the very next question you're asked is, what are you going to do next? How do you raise the bar higher? So going after those awards that are out there, MCCA, CMCP, NAMWOLF, name your diversity or bar association awards, win them, fight for them, and then raise the bar and do more next year. That's the approach that I would use. I think your next question was, is this year different than any other years with respect to the calls to action we've had in the area? And the only honest answer to that is I don't know, because we will only know when the analytics come out, when we see the metrics show that minorities and women have increased their stature and are treated more equally in law firms and in-house legal departments. And that's usually a year or two from now. However, I'm not a Pollyanna, but I am an optimist, and I do see things differently as a result of what happened in the end of May with the George Floyd murder and the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement. I'm hearing CEOs say that all lives matter can't matter until Black lives matter. I had never heard that before. I'm hearing white males talk about privileged, and it's
Yeah.
not something to gloat about, but it's surely nothing to brag about. And by understanding privilege, we want to bring people up rather than keep them behind us.
Yeah.
I am seeing legal departments and law firms talk about the need to put in place programmatic changes they've never put in place before. But on the other hand, I do respect and understand the healthy amount of cynicism in this area. Because for many of us that have been passionate about diversity and inclusion for many years, and for many of us that have been infringed by the lack of diversity and inclusion in the profession for many years, they've seen it and heard it before. And that cynicism is good because for many of us, we want to make sure we do everything possible to prove them wrong and to put actions behind the calls to actions. But we will only see that a year or two from now. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. And your point about the awards, just going back to your earlier point, is interesting because we were talking to Exelon recently, and obviously they got the ACC award and it was something we participated in with them, but they're now getting called on to talk to other corporations a lot. So after we spoke to Melissa from Exelon the other day, she was going to talk to Coke and a few other people as well who are now calling on them for advice, and obviously that because they stood out. Just in terms of, you just off the top of your head, who, and feel free not to answer if you don't feel it's appropriate, but like, is there any corporations or stories or things that have stood out for you recently, or you know, or over a larger period? Is there any stand-ups?
Sure. And by the way, I didn't answer the question from a NAMWOLF perspective. And since my answer on the NAMWOLF, then I'll come back to yours, is with respect to supplier diversity, is understand the difference between big firm diversity and supplier diversity.
Yeah. And
then get involved with NAMWOLF. We are a tremendous forum for you to find some incredible talent. So that's the one thing I would do.
Yeah.
Examples. Honda. Honda has taken the Rooney Rule, which then became the Mansfield Rule in the legal field. And basically in the States that they have the Honda Rule, which is every time they look to interview a firm for whatever reason, that half the firms they interview are minority and or women owned. And as a result, Honda has done an incredible job of taking advantage of our network of firms and has used dozens and dozens.
Wow. Okay.
So tremendous example. Walgreens, without name, and you can call them a large retail company, they engaged us 2 years ago. I just don't have permission to use their name. And the Honda has been out in the press, what they've done, and we've reported on that. Walgreens, without attribution, they hadn't heard of us 2 years ago, and now they're all in. They joined our programs. They sponsor us. They put our firms on their panel. Other examples, and thank you for...
Sorry, what do you think the turning point, like what was the trigger that suddenly led from no involvement to like massive involvement?
Well, I don't want to gloat, but I think the CLE that I give really, has been the trigger for many companies. But I think it's getting excited that diversity and inclusion is not only a smart thing, but it's a fun thing to do, and that an appreciation that their employee base really, really wants it. And you know, look, they're hearing about diversity and inclusion from a different type of person that they normally heard it from. I mean, we have been hearing about diversity and inclusion primarily from women and people of color for many years. We need white males to join into the D&I discussion. And I think to some extent, people hearing it from me is not what they're used to hearing it from, and it may resonate differently. I'm surely not better at it than other people, but it's a very different perspective.
Of course.
So I think I've had a good track record. Walgreens, without name, you know, large retail company, again, they did this, the general counsel met with me, they did the CLE, they put firms on their panel, they look to use our firms anytime they have an ad hoc or local counsel need, they sponsor us, they join both programs, they act as a referral if I need to get other corporations to. What an incredible story. Prudential, without name, has used our solicitation process and has used a lot of our firms. So lots of great examples. I think education is really the first thing that people need. I mean, look, for everything that NAMWOLF has done right, for every corporation that knows about us, there's a dozen that don't. So getting our name and what we do and our mission and vision out there is a huge step for us. And I think we've done a better job lately in doing that.
Yeah,
so.
yeah. That leads nicely into my last question, which is really, you've had a more than 10-year journey with NAMWOLF. When you look back, what is your sort of proudest or most hopeful moment or moments over that very long period?
Yeah, the simple answer is I've watched NAMWOLF grow from 5 firms and 3 companies that were active to over 195 law firms and hundreds of corporations that are active. And to be part of that, first when I was in-house, and then as heading up the in-house counsel advisory council, and now in my CEO role and being on the board, that gives me a lot of pride. Secondly, and kind of ancillary to that, our brand is greater than it's ever been. For years, I would reach out to corporations and beg them to give us the opportunity to tell our story. Today, I have corporations calling me every day asking to hear about NAMWOLF and our firms. And the CLE that I told you about, I'm doing it 4 to 6 times a week. Not because I'm asking to do it, because between you and me, it's hard to do it so many times, but because corporations are demanding that. So to see our brand rise and people see us as part of the solution gives me a lot of pride.
It's been quite a journey. I look forward to hearing about what the next journey entails.
Who knows? It's good. Watching my grandson. I'm looking, now that I won the Chamber's Lifetime Award, I go, my career's over, it's like it's done. It's like I never ever thought I'd be winning anything lifetime oriented, but
when you're still so young.
Oh gosh, 62 in 3 days. So no, I will obviously have fun. I will still zealously fight for diversity and inclusion in our profession. I will not work for anybody, but I will have some fun doing some ad hoc projects for people. So
yeah, no doubt, no
and
doubt.
In a week from today, I am for the first time ever taking my CLE and turning it into how to build a corporate D&I program. So I'm giving it to several different CEOs of corporations. So that's a challenge for me. So we'll see. But it's been fun, and we really thank you for your partnership. We're thrilled that corporations are interested. By the way, on Aon, which is interesting, they're currently using Accenture for their process. So,
interesting. Okay.
Couple things just off the record. Number one, they're very willing to meet with you guys. Number two is I don't think my former employer is necessarily good at understanding how to look at minority women-owned law firms versus the big giant law firms they're looking at. So please, Anne is really into the diversity inclusion aspect of it and all the plans that you have. You never disparage the current provider. And I think Accenture does compete with you, at least for part of that space, but to really talk about, I don't know of anything Accenture is doing in the D&I space in their process. I think that's something you need to use as a huge carrot for you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Appreciate the tip. And I really appreciate your time. That was a great chat. And as I said, I'll get the team to put it together and to send it. And if you want to make any changes or add anything or take anything away, obviously feel free to do so. And we'll look forward to the next content, which will be talking to the diverse firms about the PERSUIT feature and hearing from Melissa at Exelon as well about just, some high level tips for them in terms of responding to RFPs.
So
unfortunately,
sorry, go on.
I was going to say, because unfortunately for them, unlike some of them, most of the majority of them, they don't have a department that's sitting there doing that all day. So it's all about how do they get a leg up on that basis.
No, we really appreciate it. And, look, our firms would prefer not to use the process. They would prefer just to get the business. But the reality is that unless they figure out how to do the process, they're going to lose business. And I think that's the selling point is we are in the business to make money, but we also want to help your law firms not only survive, but thrive. And you're not going to be able to do that as more and more corporations are demanding this process, whether it's from us or from somebody else, right?
Yeah.
And I'm happy to kick in with that message if you're not comfortable, because I really do mean it. Nobody likes this. I mean, we prefer just to take somebody out to lunch and get the business, right? But it's not the way it works.
It's just not the way it's going,
All I ask of you is program managed, clear, so we get that date in the calendar and we start advertising, because again, I would like 3 or 4 weeks to continually remind our law firm. So please,
Okay.
I'm 100% supportive. I want to do it.
Okay.
But I just don't want to like be 1 week out and not sending our firms information. So please push.
Okay. 100% we'll do that.
Thank you so
Excellent.
much.
Thanks, Joel. Really appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Always a pleasure. Take care.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.